Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for carving out time in your day to join Monster's webinar on diversity and inclusion, how to build a more inclusive hiring program. We know that your time is incredibly valuable these days, and we're going to do our best to give you some time back at the end of today's session. There will be a Q&A at the end of this roundtable conversation. And then we'll be sending out a recording tomorrow. So no worries if you do have to drop off early, you'll be able to get a recording of this event on the back end. So just a quick introduction. My name is Bob Melk, and I'm the commercial officer here at Monster Worldwide. I use the pronouns he and him, and in addition to being the commercial officer for Monster, I happen to be a gay man and the proud dad of a Black girl. So this topic is incredibly important to me. And I'm really grateful for the panelists that are joining us today for this conversation, all of whom are leaders in the field of diversity and inclusion. And I would love for them to each take an opportunity to introduce themselves. And if it's okay, I think we'll start with Audra Jenkins. Audra?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Monster, for having me. I'm Audra Jenkins, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Randstad North America, and we focus in on internal and external diversity strategies for ourselves and our clients. So look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Audra. And I think we'll jump over to Dooley. Ru, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Hello, everybody. My name is Ruhal Dooley. You can just call me Ru. And I am an HR knowledge advisor with the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, and have been for almost 20 years, 19 years and 8 months, but who's counting? And I look forward to a great discussion today.
That's great. Thank you, Ru. And we'll jump over to Kay Martinez. Hello, Kay. Welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kay Martinez. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm currently the Associate Director of our JEDI office. JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion at MGH Institute of Health Professions in Boston. I also have a few side hustles, as I'm sure many folks do. I'm a consultant in my own consulting firm. I'm also a teaching fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in Critical Race Theory and Education.
Thank you, Kay. And last but not least, I want to welcome Vivian Greentree. Vivian?
Hi, I'm Vivian Greentree. I'm the head of Global Corporate Citizenship at Fiserv, the world's best fintech, we like to say, moving money at the speed of life. I'm our strategic advisor on creating a culture where our associates strive, thrive, and have drive, and head up our global corporate citizenship efforts.
Terrific. Well, welcome to all of you. I want to thank you all for joining this conversation today. And I'm really excited to discuss this very important topic. And I know, given the turnout that we have for today's webinar, that we have a lot of attendees that are eager to hear from you and learn a little bit about what you know. So I'd like to start off by just considering this research from Monster. More than 4 in 5, 86% of our candidates globally say that diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is important to them. In fact, 62% of people would go so far as turning down a job offer if it came from a company whose culture did not support a diverse workforce. And this research was conducted before the summer when the world's events had really started to take hold, and particularly before social unrest really became prolific across the United States, and put a spotlight, frankly, on how companies are addressing diversity and inclusion in everything that they do, including their hiring process. So the first question I have, and if it's okay, Audra, I'll start with you, is do you think the BLM and social unrest this summer, the BLM protests and social unrest, was a wake-up call for companies?
Thank you, Bob, for that question. Absolutely. I think that, one of the things I think is ironic is that in the last 6 or 7 months, we've seen more diversity positions and chief diversity officer roles open than I've seen in the last 10 years. And I think it truly signifies that it is a wake-up call that, the the prevailing society is expecting companies to do more. I think also when we look at our consumerism, we are now more and more global consumers of goods and services with all the advances in technology. So by ignoring a large population of people, both diverse, all diversities, all levels, I think that companies are missing the mark, and people are going to hold them accountable, whether it's their customers, their potential customers, their talent, current talent, or future talent. And we're looking at how we can be more diverse and inclusive, but more responsible, and how we can use our platform as corporations to impact systemic racism, discrimination, other items. So yeah, I think it's definitely an impact.
And Rue, any thoughts from you on this question?
Sure, yeah. So from an employer's perspective, so we greatly serve at SHRM the employer population, and I talk to members of our organization every day, and this is a hot topic, and I'm finding that companies are being forced to identify who they want to be. They're being forced, they're being required by all stakeholders. So whether it's clientele, customers, or their staffs, to make a determination about who they want to be, what their identity is going to be as a company. And we're finding, excuse me, that millennials and Gen Z want to work in alignment with companies whose values are in alignment with theirs. And in this gig economy, and given what technology can do, it's not a matter of just talent acquisition strategy anymore. It's a matter of survival, because even though we're in a down economy right now, the gig economy dictates that some Gen Z digital marketer can work at 17 different employers all over the planet right now if she wants to. So for employers to get and keep quality contributors, they're being forced to say, hey, we want to be on the right side of whatever's happening in our society. Right. And we're going to make a statement about that.
I think you're absolutely right. I think also companies are struggling with how to get started on that. Like the question of whether or not they are just going to jump on the bandwagon, as it were, right, and say the right thing, versus actually shifting and doing something about it. Becoming a pillar of leadership in their industry and in how they run their company. I really do think that the biggest struggle they're facing is how to get started. I know this is a point of conversation for us at Monster, meaning that there's a lot of folks across the company that are incredibly committed to the idea and want to ensure that it's more than just our words that we're putting forward. But how do we get that started? I'm curious, Kay, if you'd like to jump in here. What's different this time, and how can we make it stick?
I think, in my opinion, it's different this time. We saw sustained protests, uprisings over the summer. Also, that the folks who were able to, demonstrate were very interracial. There was multiracial coalitions out there. We saw people of all races and identities during a pandemic. So even though the numbers were pretty substantial, I think about the variable of the pandemic. Might it have been even larger if we didn't have these precautions in place regarding social distancing? And similarly, maybe because of that, people were more active on social media at this time. And I've seen it. I've seen companies like the NBA, for example. They have Black Lives Matter prominently on their hardwood floors, and I don't think we were at that point a few years ago. I also just want to mention that for every action, there is a reaction. And similarly, over the past few months, while we've seen so many folks, come out advocating for racial justice, I think there's been a bit of a backlash. To be totally honest, we've seen an executive order that has targeted diversity inclusion trainings, the words that you can say in them, the phrases you can use during them. I mentioned critical race theory, which I'm a part of at Harvard, and that scholarship has also been targeted. So we're in an interesting time, balancing many different perspectives. So we'll see what happens going forward.
Thanks, Kay. And one of our listeners mentioned that they had a little trouble hearing you. I can hear you actually perfectly fine, but I just wanted to let you know if you want to try to speak a little closer to your mic, it might help for some of the audience out there. And Vivian, I was hoping you could also chime in on this. Again, I'm interested in also the aspects of how companies get beyond just the words. I really do think they're struggling to find that path. They don't want to just jump on the bandwagon. How do they demonstrate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all learned this when we were little. Actions speak louder than words. The words are important, and Rue's point earlier, where companies have our CEO says, we have an obligation as a Fortune 500 to use our space and place to expand access and opportunities, but we also have an opportunity to do that. And in doing so, that's where you get employee engagement. So, we focus on talent acquisition, but there's the retention piece, the engagement piece, the performance piece, internal mobility, and engaging your, associate, your employee population. Because I do think, to Kay's point, 2020 COVID, I don't know that we would be in the same place, because in the private sector, we haven't traditionally talked about, just the entire person holistically, individual of their, outside of their job, and how being a parent or a caregiver, or anxiety or social isolation impacts one's ability to bring their whole self to work, and then how, the second and third order effects of that. And so I think we are at this inflection point because we are in each other's homes. We're talking about the background, we're in each other's homes in a way we've never been before. And that, I think, allowed for that conversation to say, you can't show up at work if you're worried about your safety, your family's safety. We won't get that discretionary effort that's so vital to creativity and innovation. And I think that's why it will stick this time, because there are so many of us working to imbue our recovery efforts with inclusion, so that whatever next normal is, or next where we are is, will be inherently more inclusive, because we are building it into the very formulations of what it is, together in a way that I just don't think that we've had, held space and place for before.
That's a great point. And it is interesting that we're all bringing ourselves, our whole selves to work, whether we like it or not.
Whether we want to or not, right? The
Yeah.
doorbell rings, the dogs bark.
Yeah, it's so true. There's definitely a level of vulnerability there that I think we're all being, you could say, forced to embrace, hopefully for the better. A report by McKinsey and Company and leanin.org recently found that more than 1 in 4 women are saying that they may have to quit or scale back their jobs. And the New York Times recently reported that 4 times more women than men are dropping out of the labor force in the month of September alone because of remote learning and lack of childcare. Audra, I know that you've been doing a lot of work and research in this area, the area of gender equality in the workplace, and specifically around how women will be impacted by automation of jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then can you share what companies should be doing to make sure that women are supported, especially right now?
Thank you for that, Bob. I think a couple things that can be done. First and foremost, it starts at the top. I love what Vivian said, that, her CEO made a comment. One of the things I'm really proud about is that we signed the CEO Action for Diversity Inclusion Pledge. And Tim Ryan said it best. It says, who best to lead the D&I charge than CEOs, because they can control business, they can make significant impact to their culture, but also the community culture as well. So I think that's the first thing. I think the next thing is leading with empathy. We need to ask what our employees need, during this time more than ever. And I don't know that employers are doing that. I think we tend to think we're asking by putting out, hey, if you need help, come here. Here's resources, COVID-19 resources. But I think having that authentic conversation to say, hey, Sheila, I know you have small children at home. How are you really doing? Just asking that question, and what can we do to make it a little bit easier. So things that I think also the second thing is empowering and trusting. Empowering and trusting that your people will own their calendar and negotiate internal meetings and things that they need when they need it. I think that's important. And trusting the work's going to get done. I don't think, except for essential workers, I can't say that anything that we're doing in the corporate space is, if someone doesn't get it done on time because they're juggling or struggling during this time, we need to give them a little bit of grace to get, or extended grace, I think. And then finally, I think proactively providing resources. I will tell you, during the social justice, protests, we were doing a lot of leader roundtables, a lot of chats and courageous conversations, and my team was really taxed, and me particularly, because I wanted to make sure everybody was well taken care of. And my CEO sent me some family meals, and that seems very simple, but that made a huge difference to me. It made me know that, one, she recognized I'm also a parent, not just as a chief diversity officer, and two, while I'm working longer hours, I'm also neglecting things such as cooking or things I would normally do, or having dinner with my family. So, just sending out some resources, whether it's Grubhub or grocery delivery service gift cards, anything that you're going to do to make it easier on your employee when they're struggling. I think that you can do those, and it's very low cost.
A great example, Audra, and very impactful. I agree. Here's a big question. Why should companies care about DEI? Why focus their energies on this? If perhaps they're thinking that it is just a moment, why should they put an effort against this? Ru, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I had a question very similar to this yesterday. And so I started giving an HR department a lot of resources around this. Why should a company care? Survival. In today's environment, that's the primary. For a long time, we've talked about, I individually have talked about, I come from an accounting background and went into human resources. So I would always remind members to speak the language that the decision makers speak, whatever language that is. And usually the decision makers speak money and economics really well. So I would always remind folks, hey, speak the language, because human resources doesn't get a whole lot of respect in the C-suite. So talk their language. They'll at least lend an ear. They'll give you a couple of minutes, right? Well, that hasn't changed. Well, it's been modified, but it hasn't changed. We talked earlier about the fact that if you want to have a solid talent acquisition strategy, you have to really think about who these folks are. We don't have the numbers replacing the baby boomers anymore. So what do the new generations want? They want to work with an organization whose values are in alignment with theirs. So pay attention to what their values are. And so that you can survive and make it to the next step, you have to pay attention to things other than money, because Gen Z has expressed to us that money is just one of those things that helps me get things done. It's not like my generation where you give me enough money, I'll find a way to be happy and fulfilled, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's economics. The EEOC, and it's fantastic. We were talking about gender equity. In 1963, we passed the Equal Pay Act because women were making allegedly 60 cents to every dollar that a man was making, doing the same exact job with the same or even better credentials. But here we are, I can't do the math, but here we are in 2020, however many years later, And by the strongest, most benevolent estimates, women are making as much as, and this is the most, generous, 88 cents to every dollar that a man is making. We're still not there. We're getting there, but we got a lot of work left to do. So to survive, and to stay out of the EEOC, and everybody can go, I'm not, advocating for the EEOC, but they have some great numbers just on their website. Go to eeoc.gov and they'll show you, we have these cases, race discrimination, this discrimination, that discrimination, and they have court decisions and they have settlements and they have the amounts of money. So for companies that want to stay afloat and for those who want to thrive, just to stay out, just economics alone, you gotta change your mind.
Great points, great reasons, motivation. Thanks, Ru. Anybody else want to jump in on this question? Anybody else have a comment or they'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, to just stay on the economic piece, but also Audra's point of CEO action. Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, he gave a great answer. And it's what's the business case for D&I, and why is D&I important? And he said, people ask me the business case for D&I. For diversity, what's the business case for homogeneity? Like, how am I going to solve problems of tomorrow with a group that looks like me, thinks like me, acts like me, where no one is thinking differently? Because that's kind of the benefit of diversity, is having different viewpoints and experiences and backgrounds at the table. I think where you gain the most benefit from that is when you have the inclusivity that, people, and trust and psychological safety. So especially, when you think of fintech and technology, financial services, you might not think of creativity and innovation, but really, we have to have that to stay ahead of our competitors, our peers, and we can't have those high performing teams where people, feel safe to, and trusting of their team members because they can be themselves, freedom to fail because, out of innovations, 9 out of 10 fail, the next one wins. And they do that together. And we can't have these high performing teams if we don't have the basis, of the DEI. And when you have that with engagement holistically, I think that's where you get, it's not fear. It's not just fear of not keeping up, but it actually drives innovation,
Right.
And that's where I think that's where, everyone wants to be.
Agreed, right? That's a motivator, no question. Thank you, Vivian.
I just have one quick point.
Sure, go ahead, Kay.
That demographics in the United States are shifting. The United States is becoming increasingly more racially diverse than ever before. If current trends progress, by 2040, we will be majority minority. The state of California is already, in fact, majority minority. Latinx people are, I think, the fastest growing demographic at the time. And we have more interracial families. Bob, you spoke about your own personal home dynamics as well. So, the makeup of this country is shifting with different combinations, permutations. And so, we are very limited to the United States end users. And so, if you want to think about the folks that you are seeking to be in business with, you may want to have their perspectives at the table. And I hope folks can hear me now.
Yes, that was perfect, Kay. Thank you.
Great.
And chances are that if you're attending this webinar, it's because you want to learn about how to change the way you're operating in terms of DEI. Hopefully you've already gotten a few tips today, but you might not know where to start. And this is, again, where I think companies are struggling. They really are. And that's where we want to help. So I wanted to ask a few questions. Kay, this first one is for you. This week is Transgender Awareness Week, very exciting. And in a survey conducted by the University of Chicago, 53% of transgender respondents reported hiding their gender identity at work for fear of being discriminated against. Really discouraging, but I'm sure quite real. Can you speak to us about what companies can do specifically to be more inclusive of transgender candidates, specifically when it comes to hiring and welcoming them into the workplace?
Thanks, Bob. Yes, let's be very specific. I want to look at 3 areas, the job application, interviews, and onboarding. So the job application, usually the first thing I fill out is the name field. And right there, I can see a company's trans inclusivity. Are you asking me for my legal name only? And is there a space for me to provide my chosen name and pronouns? So I really wonder, is it absolutely necessary for you as an employer to know my legal name during the candidate stage? I feel like my legal name is most relevant when I'm in the process of being hired, right? Then I have to fill out paperwork. So you need my legal name. I don't think you really need that. It's not imperative in the candidate stage. So I implore all the folks on the call today, as an action of solidarity in honor of Trans Awareness Week, to take a look at your job application materials. Take a look at that name field. Can you change it? Can you augment it? To remove the legal name and just use chosen name, or use legal and chosen, also including a space for pronouns. And then thinking about the sex marker categories, again, do you need to know my sex assigned at birth as a candidate? Or is it more important for you to know the gender identity of your candidate pool, which I think is the information that most people want to have, right? How many applicants are men, women, non-binary? And please, please don't use the other field. What does that mean when you say other?
Mm.
There are many other ways that we can solicit this information. Gender expansive, for example, could be a category. And yeah, so those are the 3 areas in the job application. Then the interview part. A big one for me is if the folks interviewing me share their names and pronouns right off the bat. And now that we're on Zoom, many of us on the call here have put our pronouns in our display name, so you can do that. So those are the subtle markers that show me where this company is at in regards to trans inclusion. And I think the good news is that all these things are fixable. So if you haven't done them yet, you can do them now. And I use they, them, theirs pronouns, which I recognize is new for a lot of people. So when I'm in interviews, I'm just kind of being mindful of folks' comfortability with that. Is it new? Am I going to be misgendered even in the interview process? I usually recommend that if they, them pronouns are new for you, try to use the candidate's name. Just refer to them by name while you practice on your own time to get that down. And that could be a great space for training for companies to start learning more about trans inclusion pronoun use. The last one is the onboarding, right? So let's say I've made it all the way through, I'm hired now. Some of the big things I'm looking for are benefits. Are health benefits trans inclusive, particularly gender affirming surgeries? That's an ongoing benefit that I think transgender and gender variant people like me are looking for, making sure that that's a part of a package. Thinking about your facilities on site. I know a lot of people are working remotely right now, but take a look at your gender neutral bathrooms if you have them, and facilities in general. And then lastly, ERGs I think are super important spaces for community building for LGBT people and their allies. Bob, I know you're part of several. So I think, all of these things together, these 3 areas, the job application, the interview, and the onboarding, are some really quick, easy fixes that folks can get started on right now.
Those are great, Kay. Thank you so much. Those are really specific and I think very practical examples. So thank you for that. I'm sure everybody appreciated it. Stock imagery on your career site probably isn't enough, again, for a company to demonstrate that they're all in, that they're embracing diversity and inclusion. What should companies do to show that they're truly committed when they're speaking externally as it relates to their commitment to inclusive hiring? Audra, can I ask you that question?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that, Bob. I think first and foremost, I think you want to make sure your leaders, and it starts with the CEO, you have a consistent cadence, a one DEI voice. So you don't have one leader saying one thing, another leader saying something else. Not that it's scripted, but you have a very clear vision and mission around diversity and inclusion. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is you need to, I think Vivian said earlier, you've got to walk the walk. I mean, you can't just be speaking lip service. You've got to really, truly live up to what you're saying around diversity and inclusion. And if you're not there yet, be transparent and honest about that. Like, hey, we recognize we've got bottlenecks and barriers, we've got challenges and opportunities. All corporations do, but we're really being very intentional, and these are the 3 or 4 actions that we're taking to be more diverse and inclusive. For example, we have an executive diversity council. We're forming a global diversity council, and we have a D&I actions task force specifically for systemic racism and discrimination, and working on that. So just coming up with the things that that matter, externally. I think having that consistent voice and messaging is important. And then finally, I would say, for candidates' perspective, on the external voice, everything that they are researching about your company, your brand matters, and it matters when you're silent. It matters when you speak out. It matters when you are, swift to deal with people in your organization who are discriminatory, racist, or a bad, is detracting from your vision, mission, and values for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think those are some things that I think actions matter, words matter, and what we say and do this time, this year, matters the most, because I feel as though it is definitely the stepping stone of what happens next, and where we go as a society and where we go as organizations.
Thank you, Audra. Great points. I think that especially resonated for me when you talked about companies taking a stand, making a statement about what's going on, and the impact that can have on candidates' points of view. So well said, and so I really feel that. So thank you for bringing that up, because I do think companies are struggling with whether they should add their voice, perhaps because they're wondering, is it enough? It may not be enough, but it's certainly a good place to start, right? To get your position out there. So thank you for that. And Rue, Starbucks and Verizon are publicizing their diversity employee compositions, choosing to be very transparent about who they're hiring now. They've had at least Starbucks has been in the news in the last year or so with some interesting issues. So I think they're trying to be a little bit more proactive. Is this something that companies should consider, or are there other ways that they should be transparent?
That's a great question. There are a lot of things that companies, in my opinion, should do, and not everything. This may not be the popular response, but not everything is going to fit every employer. Some employers can afford to do some things that some other employers can't. I'm finding that in these pandemic conditions that the planet are under right now, there are a lot of smaller employers. And when I say smaller, not 1 and 2 and 3 employees, but maybe 70 employees, companies that had to discontinue something that they began a year or 2 ago that they were taking a hit on. And so now they have to lay off 20 people, and they don't see an end to the downward spiral. And so they're way too busy putting out fires to do the strategic moves, or at least so they think. Today being, late in 2020, companies are going to have to really do a number of things. And to your earlier question, more than just one thing, and is it enough? And yes, one thing at a time, but not everything fits every company. And so every employer, every company is going to have to make a decision about, as we said before, who they want to be and how they want to be seen. And as Audra mentioned, their brand is everything, especially now. And some of the hits that they take because of a stand that they take and make public are just going to be a part of the cost of doing business. Companies have PLI, professional liability insurance, because there are going to be some costs that are going to affect the company. Entrepreneurs tend to be more or less risk averse than the rest of us. There's a cost to doing business. And so companies are going to have to be transparent about the demographics of their staff, their vendors. If a company can say, we use all 100% recycled paper. That's great. Take that another step. Now let's talk about the people who work there, right? And it takes courage to do that, but companies are moving in that direction. Not every company has the privilege of doing that, but companies are going. I'm seeing it already, and that's the trend. And I'm seeing that for those who are going to be surviving and thriving on the cutting edge of this, they're going to be the ones that are more transparent in a number of different ways. If I were to list them, we would be talking until tomorrow. But transparency is a changing of a mindset, and then it cascades throughout the organization.
Thanks, Ru. Monster actually has some research that we haven't even released yet publicly, so stay tuned for that. But in this new study, we saw 2 areas of disconnect between what candidates want and what they're seeing from prospective employers. Candidates are saying they want more diversity in leadership and they want more employee resource groups. I can speak to that as a leader of one of Monster's ERG groups and a participant in one of Randstad's BRG groups. I know that this is something that really drives inclusion and positivity around diversity and inclusion for a lot of employees. I'm curious what you folks think companies should do to increase diversity, however, in their leadership. I know a lot of companies are struggling in this area. How do we accelerate this? Kay, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I've been active in the chat too. Thanks, folks, for your questions. Thank you. There are many ways to go about it. I wanted to highlight, I think, mentoring and promotion from within. So how are we growing diverse talent? Also, I just want to unpack, what do we mean by increasing diversity in senior leadership? I usually talk to my clients about shifting from diverse to underrepresented and thinking about, who are the people that are at the table currently? Where do they come from? And who are the perspectives that are not there? And then that's the target audience that we need to, recruit, mentor, and nurture. So let's say, higher up the chain, it's predominantly men. So in that context, we want to look at women. How are we growing women into senior leadership roles? And then we add layers of race and sexuality as well. So I think there's a lot of ways, and certainly ability. Many aspects of diversity are not apparent. So I think it's really important for every company to do these assessments internally, these demographic assessments, so that they can determine what are the underrepresented identities. And so I think also, how we're growing and promoting and mentoring the folks that we do have, rather than, I think the external focus seems to be really intense. We want to make sure that we're hiring and recruiting the best talent, but what about your own talent within?
Very good, Kay. I agree with those the assessment idea. I like that a lot. So we've talked a lot about how to make sure your recruitment materials speak to the audiences in ways that feel inclusive, how to get the message across that you are an inclusive company with hopefully a diverse workforce, or at least that you're striving to achieve diversity in your workforce, but in terms of actually building a more diverse talent pipeline. And I can tell you, as someone who's obviously committed to this, to the area to focus on diversity, I struggle with this as well. My leadership team, we do struggle with how to nurture that diverse talent pipeline. Where do you get started? Vivian, I know you have a lot of experience with developing a strong veteran hiring program. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that can help with diversity and inclusion efforts?
For sure, and it's such a great question for me too, because our diversity and inclusion program, and the reason why corporate citizenship has evolved the way it has in the intersection between diversity and inclusion, associate engagement, community engagement, strategic philanthropy, is because of the idea of going to market with the veteran population. It was the first time really that we had looked at looking at being an employer of choice you have to engage holistically. And what I mean by that was, whether they were active duty, transitioning service members, veterans, military families, looking at, student veterans. It was really engaging with the community, the nonprofits that support the talent pipeline. Where are we going to find them? There's not one list anywhere in the country of, veterans where you can just go and, there's not like a veteran tree that you can pluck from. Develop those relationships, takes time. It takes authenticity. And I think it ties back to your point before. It's responsible business practices. It's how you show up in the communities in which you're trying to source from. It's in your operations. It's your policies. The things that we did to say, to be an employer of choice for the veteran community, with our military guard and leave policy, ensuring that service members didn't have to choose between serving their country and working with us, because eventually we'll lose that battle. And then it evolved to the thought of, if we make women or men choose between starting families and growing their families or working, at a company, the company will always lose if you make someone choose between who they are or what they'd like to do and put up a wall between their kind of passion and purpose and then making money. We'll lose that discretionary effort. And so it's been focusing on whether it's engaging them on, in sourcing, recruiting, retaining, engaging, providing internal mobility, or helping small veteran-owned businesses, because we always say we could hire 10,000 veterans. It might take us a few years, but we could help 10,000 small veteran-owned businesses and military spouse-owned businesses hire one veteran or military spouse, and thereby we've created and helped the whole ecosystem. And so it's really, you have to show up for your internally so that you can, what you promote externally matches, because I think someone else said earlier, it's your associates and your employees are the ones that are going to refer their friends and family either to use your services, come and work with you as a team. And if they don't buy into what you're doing, or, if their benefits don't match their, you don't have pay parity, you don't have domestic partner coverage, it's hard when another company offers that, what are you doing different? And why should they stay with you when they could find that elsewhere?
Terrific. Thank you, Vivian. And we're going to ask one more question before we get to the Q&A. And I know there's been a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to get to that in just a moment. But it's not enough to want to create more inclusive hiring. You really do need buy-in from senior leadership in your company. And I'm curious, how do you promote the importance of DEI within your own org and frankly, within the leadership team? This is something that we were talking about at Monster recently as well. I do think that our senior leadership team at Monster, I'm proud to say, are really invested in diversity and inclusion. But I worry sometimes that if leaders throughout a company aren't all demonstrating their support for that importance, that you're not going to instill a confidence of focus on inclusive hiring practice. So I'm curious, Audra, do you mind answering on this question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Bob, for that. I think for me, and I'll just use myself as an example, it started with a business plan, having a business plan tying diversity into strategic pillars linked to mission and vision values of our company. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing too, I think Ruhal said it earlier, speaking the language, what matters in your organization. So we tie it to 3 pillars: workplace, marketplace, and business. And workplace is linked to our own internal workforce diversity and culture and things like that, and reducing turnover by having a diverse and inclusive organization. And then marketplace is our branding, how we can be branded as a diverse and inclusive employer and partner of choice, which impacts our sales, revenue, talent attraction, customer attraction, and retention. And then also the business is how we embed that into our everyday operations of what we do. So that's from our CSR work, like our Hire Hope program, our RISE sponsorship program, our Transcend project, which is particularly for diverse and untapped communities. all those things are tied together. It's our business ecosystem. It's kind of our, what do we want to be known for as an organization? So your brand, I talked about it earlier. I can't emphasize enough, your brand can be, the thing that, benefits you, or it could be the things that destroys you. I look at the collective power, purchasing power of consumers. Just one bad review, just one bad, if I have a bad experience, I won't spend money there again. I'll withhold my money. I will boycott my money if you don't line up to my vision, mission, and values as a person, and you're blatantly not doing anything about the diversity and inclusivity of your organization, or chastising leaders or coming out saying things that are inappropriate. I don't have to spend my hard-earned money there. So I think people know that, they need to know that they have some power and influence, and it all ties back into the things that you're doing day to day. So I think that's how you drive it through the organization.
Thank you, Audra. That's great. All right, we're going to jump over to some of the many questions that we're getting from our live audience. And there really are some really interesting ones. And I'm going to start with this first one because I really love it, because I think it helps us understand that a lot of people are wanting to understand more, get more context for some of the statements that they're hearing today, some of the things that they're hearing around diversity and inclusion. So, Kay, this one is for you. What's wrong in asking for the legal name of a candidate? One of our viewers said, could you please elaborate a little bit more on that, because they're not sure they understood why we shouldn't ask for the legal name of the candidate.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know that it's wrong, right? It's standard procedure, correlates with a lot of important work that you have to do. You have to fill out I-9s, W-4s, et cetera, right? So it is a standard legal procedure. However, in my case, for example, my legal name, but the name that I have on my driver's license, my birth certificate, is not the name that I share publicly. Many transgender people have names on documentation, have sex markers on documentation that does not reflect who they are. There's a lengthy legal process that costs a lot of money and time that people have to go through in order to change their documentation to reflect who they are. That's not accessible for every trans person. So when I fill out a job application, it just says legal name, first name, last name. Already I'm like, oh, okay. So I have to use the name that I don't want to use necessarily, or disclose it publicly. And sometimes, depending on the database or the system that I'm using, there is no space for me to say, K, right? Like, please call me K and not this other name. So then, I get the call back from the person that reviewed my documentation. They're like, oh, hey, name that I don't want to use, or legal name, we'd like to invite you to an interview. And so it kind of puts me in this position where now I'm like, okay, how am I going to bring this up? And you saw that statistic, right? That 53% of transgender people, are kind of afraid to disclose their gender identity for fear of discrimination. So that setup, because the systems that we use, I think can create some of these dynamics that aren't necessarily as inclusive as we'd like to be. So if you had a form, that said legal name, last name, and just add one more line that says, chosen name or preferred name, whatever you want to call it, then you could see, on whatever system you use. It's, for me, for example, has my legal name that I don't want to go by, chosen name or preferred name. That's the name I'm going to call you. And then you could even add, additional fields, like what is the pronoun of this candidate. And I think we're just living in a time where we have these outdated systems. I think a very maybe controversial or prescient one has been the race and ethnicity categories, especially in the census for Latinx people, right? Is not capturing the robust diversity of our demographics. And I think for most companies, they are missing out truly on reflecting the diversity that they have, because they're using outdated systems. So you have probably more LGBT and multiracial employees then you're able to report on, because you don't have the fields in order to do that. And so I'm working with a lot of companies on updating their systems so that they are able to do two things. One, be more inclusive to applicants and transgender employees, and then be able to report out on the numbers that they have.
Thank you very much. This is an interesting question as well. The subject, this is from one of our audience members. The subject came up recently about candidates with criminal histories and race. I'm just reading it the way it was written. Do you have any thoughts on how to phrase this to let candidates know that we want them to apply and that this will not stop them from being hired? I'm going to throw this out to everybody, see if anyone wants to jump in with a response to this question. Audra?
Yeah, Bob, I wanted to respond on the criminal history one because I'm thinking about a Hire Hope program. As you know, that program is for women that have been survivors of abuse, homelessness, sex trafficking, and exploitation. So a lot of women, especially those that have been in sex trafficking, they have they may have spotty, career history, things they don't want to put on there, as a legitimate career, in the job history, but they also typically have have been arrested for something. And so we have an adjudication process for that. So we work with our legal team to say, we don't just automatically let our background check people term somebody or say no when it comes to someone that's in this particular program. So I think there's ways around that. And then on the arrest, legally, you can't turn someone down because they were arrested. You can only thing you can talk about is convicted, where they were convicted. You might have been arrested for a crime, and it may show up in your background check, but it wasn't necessarily a conviction. So on applications, you have to watch the language there. I think that's one thing. Mm-hmm. And I think the other piece of it is the problem with the job hiring process, the recruitment process is we're not going to these populations. I think Kay has said it earlier, these underrepresented groups or diverse and untapped communities to find this talent, to let them know, hey, we're looking for you. We want you here at our organization. And I think that people are automatically turned off by, the red tape, frankly, of applying for a job. A lot of newer companies are just putting the basics where you can do a LinkedIn profile and your name, just something very quick and easy. They're not asking too much information. And then later on, to Kay's point, when you are becoming a contender and because they're serious about offering you the position, then, they ask for all the legal documentation of everything that goes along with that. So I just think that we just need a better way of looking at not only, people that have been marginalized in the past, but going after those groups and trying to find a way to bring them into our organization so that we can tackle some of these systemic issues and barriers right. That's plaguing our organization and society.
Thanks, Audra. Another interesting question from an audience member is that they would like to learn a little more, hear a little more about the role of employee resource groups, ERGs, at small companies. Who'd like to jump in here?
Oh my God, it's only been 6 months and I have not mastered the unmute button. I'm desperately trying to find it. I love this question because our ERGs play such a huge role in not in D&I strategy, but in overall engagement. It's meeting people where they're at, because each ERG, we have 8 globally. We have 6,000 members. They're their own little microcosm and representation of what Fiserv is. And they are the most passionate, purpose-driven, team members that we could have. Purpose is such a factor in making a difference in teams and companies and cultures. And the most fulfilled people I know are using their passion. And so when you channel that positively, and our pillars, I think, Audra, you mentioned earlier, ours are employment, experience, and entrepreneurship. So helping us source, recruit, retain, engage, internally promote, and then engage small, diverse businesses. They're huge. They help us draft policies. They help us engage new markets, whether it's, small chambers of commerce in their regions, accelerators, incubators, resource providers. They really, we have a volunteer catalog for our Back to Business to help small businesses, especially small Black and minority-owned businesses, knowing they've been disproportionately affected by COVID. We opened up this volunteer catalog and said, if you have a subject matter expertise that you want to share with aggregates of small businesses, we've got 30 topics. We've got over 50 volunteers across the country who said, I'm good at cyber. I want to help these small businesses know when they go online how to securely do their payments or understand what goes into that. They're just, we know that engaged employees are better performers. So ERGs, there's only upshoot from channeling and allowing opportunities for meaningful engagement in whatever ways that make sense for your business. I could talk. They're just magical. So we could talk all day about how to activate them regionally, nationally, globally. We just did our first global Diwali celebration, and just talking about being on the journey together. There's not at any one point. I mean, I've been taking notes too throughout this whole thing, because we are all on this journey. I don't think there's ever one point where we'll ever say, I know enough. And ERGs are the, most distilled kind of revelation of that, because your associates are constantly bringing new ideas, new partnerships to bear.
Any thoughts, Vivian, on for a small company, how they would get an ERG started? I think small companies might struggle with just the fact that their numbers, especially if they're still working toward diversity, are going to be so small that they worry that it might be anticlimactic. Or any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so there's always a way. I would say, inclusion starts with I, and so our individual efforts provide this, collective benefit. And if you do have smaller group joining in other chambers, other regional, national coalitions, and just showing up and learning. I mean, the CEO Action had the annual, closed door summit today, and just listening into other companies. There were companies with, 5 people. There were companies with 50,000 people. And so there is, I think, difference in tactics for how they engage, but I'm happy to do like a one-off from my perspective, after this with whoever asked that, and really sit down and see, what other companies in their areas have diversity councils, what are community-based groups that are, forming groups. Like in Atlanta, we have Atlanta, which is, companies, it's not its own organization. It's just voluntary companies that want to get together and talk about that. We have a ERG a team of teams, if you will, for women's ERGs that we're a member of too. And again, companies, sole proprietors to, Delta are members. So there's always a way. It's just how much effort do you want to use to uncover, and unlock the potential that exists somewhere. And I think the more people that we talk to, the more, or that, the question asker talks to, the more they'll find kind of the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees. There'll be an organization. The information that Kay, you've given out today has been, I know, helpful to, the hundreds of us that are on here. And that was, you didn't have to have an ERG to do that.
Thank you, Vivian. Great points. And believe it or not, guys, we've come to almost a full hour. So I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys have been terrific. Audra Jenkins, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer from Randstad. Dooley, HR Knowledge Advisor from SHRM. Kay Martinez, Associate Director, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion from MGH Institute of Health Professions, and Vivian Greentree, PhD, Senior Vice President, Head of Global Corporate Citizenship at Fiserv. Thank you all so much for being a part of the conversation today. And I want to remind all of our listeners that we will be sending out the recording as well as some additional materials. And if you do want to reach out to our panelists, I'm sure they'd be happy to take a few more questions from you through their LinkedIn or some connection. I know Vivian offered to help on the back end, so thank you for that, Vivian. So thank you all for coming, and I think we'll end it there for today. Cheers, everybody.